Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you never bothered to see. The crystal glasses shimmered beneath the warm chandeliers as quiet conversations floated through the elegant dining room of Ashford House, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, where billion-dollar negotiations often sounded no louder than polite dinner conversations. Every table was reserved weeks in advance. Every waiter moved with silent precision. Every guest expected perfection. And among all those carefully choreographed movements was Claire Bennett, a 27-year-old waitress whose calm smile rarely changed no matter how demanding the evening became. She carried 2 entrees across the polished hardwood floor with effortless balance, thanked an elderly couple for their patience, refilled a glass of sparkling water before anyone needed to ask, and quietly noticed details that most people overlooked. A wedding ring absent from a regular customer's hand. A nervous young man rehearsing a proposal beneath the table. An exhausted mother pretending she wasn't too tired to enjoy dinner with her family. Claire had learned that listening often mattered more than speaking. 3 years earlier, she had dreamed of becoming a registered nurse, but life had interrupted those plans when her mother's heart condition forced her to leave nursing school and take 2 restaurant shifts each day to keep medical bills under control. She never complained. She simply adapted. Most people assumed she was just another waitress. Claire had stopped correcting them long ago. Across the dining room, the front doors opened with quiet elegance, and every manager instinctively straightened their posture. William Carter stepped inside wearing a tailored navy suit that looked expensive without trying to be noticed. At 44, he had built Carter Biotech into one of America's fastest-growing medical technology companies. Yet the success came with endless flights, board meetings, investor calls, and nights measured more by deadlines than sleep. Financial magazines admired his discipline. Employees respected his leadership. Very few people knew how often he skipped breakfast, replaced lunch with coffee, and convinced himself that another meeting mattered more than another meal. Tonight was no different. He had flown in from Boston less than 2 hours earlier after presenting a groundbreaking healthcare initiative and was already discussing tomorrow morning's conference before he had even reached his table. His assistant quietly suggested ordering something substantial. William dismissed the idea with a faint smile and requested only black coffee and mineral water while promising he would eat later. Later had become one of the most dangerous words in his life. Claire noticed him the way she noticed every guest, not because of the headlines attached to his name, but because experience had taught her that exhaustion often hid behind expensive watches and confident voices. As she placed the coffee on his table, she caught a brief glimpse of pale fingertips gripping the edge of the menu just a little tighter than normal. His smile looked practiced rather than relaxed. Tiny beads of perspiration rested near his temple despite the comfortable temperature inside the restaurant. Most diners would never have seen it. Claire did. She offered a warm smile and gently asked whether he would like something light to eat before his meeting began. William thanked her politely, but declined without looking away from the financial report glowing across his tablet. Claire nodded and walked away, yet something unsettled her. Not fear. Instinct. The kind that had once been sharpened during long clinical training hours before life had taken her in another direction. Around them, silverware clinked softly against porcelain. A pianist played familiar jazz standards near the fireplace, and laughter drifted through the dining room like a comfortable evening breeze. Nobody noticed that William's shoulders had become slightly uneven. Nobody noticed that his breathing had quietly changed. Nobody except the young waitress moving steadily between tables, whose attention kept returning to the businessman sitting alone beneath the golden lights. Less than 60 seconds later, a fork slipped gently from William Carter's hand and landed against the white tablecloth with a sound so small that almost no one turned to look. Claire did, and before anyone else realized that something was terribly wrong, she had already started walking toward him with calm determination in her eyes. Claire reached William's table before anyone else moved, but instead of reacting with panic, she slowed herself down. Calm was contagious, and she knew that frightened voices could turn one emergency into 20. She gently rested the tray on a nearby service station and knelt beside him without drawing unnecessary attention. "Mr. Carter, can you hear me?" she asked in a steady voice. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused but responsive. That was enough to tell her he was still aware of his surroundings. A nearby executive immediately stood and reached toward William's arm. "Help him stand up," the man said anxiously. Claire raised one hand with quiet confidence. "Please do not move him yet." There was no hesitation in her voice, only certainty. The authority surprised everyone, including the restaurant manager who had just rushed across the dining room. Claire quickly noticed the untouched coffee, the unopened bread basket, and the faint tremor in William's hand. His skin had lost much of its color, and small drops of perspiration continued forming across his forehead. She remembered countless hours spent practicing patient observation before she had left nursing school. The lessons had never disappeared. Life had simply taken her away from the classroom. "Someone please call 911, she said calmly. "Tell them the guest is conscious but experiencing sudden weakness and dizziness." The hostess immediately reached for the phone. Claire turned back toward William. "Can you tell me your first name?" she asked softly. He blinked several times before answering in a quiet voice. "William." "Good. Stay with me, William. Do not try to sit up yet." Around them, conversations had faded into complete silence. Even the pianist had quietly stopped playing. Guests watched with concern, but Claire never looked away from the man in front of her. She carefully encouraged him to remain still while another employee brought a folded jacket at her request. She used it to help support his position without making sudden movements. "Have you eaten today?" she asked. William hesitated. "Coffee this morning." Claire exchanged a brief glance with his assistant, whose worried expression answered the question before words did. "He skipped lunch during the flight," she admitted quietly. "And dinner?" Claire nodded almost imperceptibly. She had seen people push themselves beyond healthy limits before. Nurses called it listening to symptoms. Executives often called it productivity. There was a difference. She continued speaking in an even rhythm, giving William simple questions to answer, because conversation itself helped her monitor his awareness. "What city are we in?" "New York." "Very good. Do you know what day it is?" He answered correctly again, though his voice sounded weaker than before. Claire noticed his breathing beginning to settle ever so slightly. The restaurant manager leaned closer. "Claire, the ambulance is on the way. Is there anything else you need?" "Please ask everyone to give him some space," she replied. "Fresh air and a quiet environment will help." The manager immediately guided nearby guests a few steps back without creating alarm. It was remarkable how quickly the room followed Claire's lead. She never raised her voice. She simply spoke with quiet purpose. William looked at her more clearly now. "I am sorry," he whispered. "You have nothing to apologize for," Claire answered with a reassuring smile. "Right now your only job is to rest." For the first time that evening, William stopped thinking about tomorrow's meetings, quarterly reports, or investor presentations. Instead, he focused on the unfamiliar comfort of a stranger who treated him not as one of the wealthiest men in America, but simply as another human being who needed help. Outside, the distant sound of approaching sirens slowly echoed through the Manhattan streets. Inside the restaurant, every eye remained fixed on the young waitress whose calm presence had transformed confusion into order. Nobody knew her story. Nobody knew she had once memorized emergency care procedures while dreaming of wearing hospital scrubs instead of a black serving apron. At that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that one quiet decision, made without fear or hesitation, had already begun changing far more than a single evening. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but to everyone inside the restaurant, time had seemed to slow into careful, deliberate moments. 2 paramedics entered carrying medical equipment, while Claire calmly summarized everything she had observed from the instant William had dropped his fork until he had regained his focus. She spoke clearly, mentioning his pale complexion, the excessive perspiration, the prolonged period without food, his responses to simple questions, and the gradual improvement after remaining still. One of the paramedics glanced at her with quiet appreciation before beginning his own assessment. William's blood pressure remained lower than expected, but it had already started recovering. His pulse was steadying. After several minutes, the lead paramedic looked toward William with a reassuring smile. "You were fortunate that someone recognized the situation quickly and kept you from standing before we arrived. That probably prevented additional complications." William turned his head toward Claire, who had already stepped backward to give the medical team room to work. She lowered her eyes slightly, almost uncomfortable with the sudden attention. She had never helped someone expecting recognition. Helping people had once simply been the future she imagined for herself. The restaurant slowly returned to life as guests resumed their conversations in softer voices, though many continued watching Claire with quiet admiration. Several employees whispered to one another, surprised by the confidence they had just witnessed from someone they believed they already knew. To them, Claire had always been dependable, polite, and hardworking. None of them had realized how much knowledge remained hidden behind her calm smile. As the paramedics prepared William for transport to a nearby hospital for further evaluation, he motioned gently toward Claire. "Would you come here for a moment?" he asked. She approached without hesitation. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I do not remember everything that happened, but I remember hearing your voice. It made everything feel less frightening." Claire smiled with genuine warmth. "I am glad you are feeling better. The doctors will take good care of you from here." William studied her face for a moment, noticing that she never appeared impressed by his reputation or intimidated by his success. She looked at him the same way she had looked at every guest who entered the restaurant that evening, with kindness free from expectation. "Have we met before?" he asked unexpectedly. Claire shook her head. "No, sir." "Then how did you know what to do?" For the first time since the evening had begun, she hesitated. "I spent several years studying nursing before life took me somewhere else." She offered no further explanation. There was no attempt to make her story sound tragic or inspiring. It was simply the truth. Before William could ask another question, the paramedics reminded him that they needed to leave. He nodded reluctantly, allowing them to guide him toward the waiting ambulance. As the doors closed, he continued looking through the rear window until the restaurant disappeared from view. During the drive to the hospital, his assistant sat quietly beside him, still visibly shaken. After several minutes, William finally broke the silence. "Find out more about Claire Bennett." His assistant looked surprised. "You want a background report?" William slowly shook his head. "No, not a business investigation." He stared out the window at the passing city lights reflecting across the rain-speckled glass. "I simply want to understand how someone with that level of training ended up serving dinner instead of caring for patients." Meanwhile, back inside Ashford House, Claire quietly returned to collecting empty glasses from nearby tables. One grateful customer thanked her. Another left an unusually generous tip. She accepted both with the same modest smile before wiping down a table exactly as she had done hundreds of times before. Nothing about her movements suggested she believed her life had changed. She folded clean napkins, adjusted silverware, and helped a nervous new server recover after spilling sparkling water on an empty chair. Outside, the flashing lights disappeared into the Manhattan night. Inside, Claire continued doing the work that had carried her through countless difficult days, unaware that one quiet act of compassion had already begun changing not only the future of a billionaire, but the direction of her own life as well. William spent the night under observation at Midtown Medical Center while a team of physicians completed a full evaluation. The test results brought relief instead of fear. There had been no serious cardiac event. The attending physician explained that severe dehydration, prolonged stress, missed meals, and physical exhaustion had combined to create a dangerous drop in blood pressure. "Your body has been asking you to slow down for months," the doctor said gently. "Tonight it finally forced you to listen." William gave a quiet smile that carried more humility than confidence. For years he had believed discipline meant ignoring discomfort. Success had become a series of postponed meals, delayed vacations, shortened nights, and endless promises that he would rest after the next acquisition, after the next product launch, after the next quarterly report. Somehow there was always another milestone waiting beyond the horizon. As dawn spread across the Manhattan skyline, he looked through the hospital window at the city already coming back to life. Delivery trucks rolled through quiet streets. Office lights flickered on one floor at a time. Thousands of people were beginning another ordinary day. Somewhere among them, Claire Bennett was probably tying on her black apron before another restaurant shift, as if nothing remarkable had happened. The thought stayed with him far longer than he expected. Later that morning, his assistant, Daniel Brooks, entered the room carrying a folder and a cup of oatmeal instead of coffee. William raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled. "Doctor's orders. Real breakfast comes first." William accepted the bowl without complaint, surprising them both. After a few spoonfuls, he looked toward the folder resting on the bedside table. "Did you find anything?" Daniel nodded. "Only what was publicly available. Claire Bennett attended nursing School with excellent academic standing. She left during her third year about 4 years ago. There are no disciplinary records and no academic problems. She simply withdrew. William remained silent. Daniel continued. She has worked at Ashford House ever since. No interviews. No social media presence worth mentioning. She seems to live a very private life. William closed the folder after reading only the first page. He was not interested in numbers or addresses. He wanted answers that no report could provide. Why would someone so close to becoming a nurse walk away from that dream without looking back? That afternoon, Claire finished another lunch shift before taking the subway to the opposite side of the city. Instead of going home, she stopped at a modest brick apartment building where she carried 2 grocery bags up 3 flights of stairs without complaining. Inside, the small apartment smelled of fresh vegetable soup and chamomile tea. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, sat near the window knitting a baby blanket for the neighbor's first grandchild. Her silver hair framed a gentle face marked more by kindness than illness. "You are home early," Margaret said with a warm smile. Claire kissed her forehead before placing fresh fruit on the kitchen counter. "Only by 30 minutes. She never mentioned the previous evening. To Claire, helping someone in need was not extraordinary enough to deserve retelling. Instead, she asked about medication, checked the refrigerator, watered 2 small plants beside the window, and laughed as her mother insisted that the soup needed more pepper. Their conversation wandered through simple things that filled ordinary lives. Rising grocery prices, a neighbor's new puppy, a television show they both enjoyed. Moments like these reminded Claire why she had never regretted putting family before ambition, even if the decision had quietly reshaped her future. Across the city, William found himself thinking less about quarterly earnings and more about that tiny apartment he imagined but had never seen. He remembered the way Claire had spoken to frightened strangers with patience instead of urgency and wondered what kind of life created that level of quiet strength. For the first time in many years, curiosity replaced calculation. He was no longer trying to solve a business problem. He was trying to understand a human story, and he sensed that the answer would be worth far more than anything written inside a financial report. 3 days later, William returned to Carter Biotech headquarters, but something inside him had shifted in a way that even his closest colleagues could not explain. The glass conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline was filled with executives discussing expansion strategies, projected revenue, and international partnerships. Yet William found his attention drifting every time someone casually placed another untouched cup of coffee in front of him. Without saying a word, he reached for the breakfast Daniel had quietly arranged before the meeting. It was a simple meal of oatmeal, fruit, and yogurt. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Their chief executive officer had never eaten during morning meetings. William noticed their expressions and smiled faintly. "Some habits are worth changing," he said before returning to the discussion. The room fell silent for a brief moment before business continued. Daniel watched from the far end of the table with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes the greatest victories began with the smallest decisions. That evening, William canceled 2 networking dinners and left the office before sunset for the first time in months. Instead of heading home immediately, he asked his driver to stop several blocks away from Ashford House. He did not want to interrupt Claire's work or embarrass her with a public display of gratitude. He simply wanted to see the restaurant where everything had changed. Standing across the street beneath the golden glow of the city lights, he watched guests enter through the revolving doors while Claire moved gracefully from table to table inside. She greeted every customer with exactly the same warmth, whether they wore designer suits or construction uniforms after a long day's work. An elderly veteran struggling with his cane received the same patient attention as a famous television personality seated near the window. William realized that kindness was not something Claire reserved for extraordinary moments. It was simply the way she lived every ordinary day. He quietly turned away without going inside. Gratitude, he decided, should never become another burden for someone already carrying enough. The following afternoon, Claire reported for another shift, unaware that someone had spent the previous evening observing not her skills, but her character. The restaurant manager called her into the office before service began. "Claire, I received 3 separate letters from guests who were here the other night," he said, handing her neatly folded envelopes. "Every one of them praised the way you handled the emergency. One family even wrote that watching you remain calm helped their children feel safe. Claire accepted the letters with genuine surprise. She smiled softly but placed them back on the manager's desk. Would you mind sharing them with the rest of the staff too? Everyone helped that night. The hostess called for emergency services. The servers cleared space. Nobody stood around doing nothing. The manager looked at her for a long moment before nodding. That sounds exactly like something you would say. Later that evening, during a short break, Claire sat alone in the employee lounge with a cup of hot tea. One of the younger servers, Emily, hesitated before sitting beside her. Can I ask you something? Claire nodded. When everyone else panicked, were you scared? Claire looked down at the steam rising from her cup before answering honestly. Of course I was. Emily looked confused. You did not seem afraid at all. Claire smiled gently. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to stay calm long enough to help someone else. Emily quietly repeated the sentence to herself, as though trying to remember it forever. Neither woman noticed that, across the city, William had made a decision of his own. He instructed Daniel to locate the university where Claire had once studied, not to purchase influence or rewrite her past, but to discover whether a forgotten dream could still have a future. For the first time in years, one of the wealthiest men in America was investing his energy not in another company, but in the possibility that a quiet act of compassion deserved the chance to bloom into something even greater. Within a week, Daniel returned carrying something far more meaningful than another business report. It was a thin folder from Hudson College of Nursing, where Claire had studied before leaving during her third year. William opened it slowly, expecting transcripts and administrative records. Instead, he found a handwritten note that had been preserved inside her student file. It was from one of her former professors. Claire Bennett possesses uncommon clinical judgment. She remains calm under pressure, notices details others miss, and treats every patient with quiet dignity. If circumstances ever allow her to return, she has the potential to become an extraordinary nurse. William read the note twice before carefully closing the folder. Numbers had built his fortune, but words like these could not be measured on a balance sheet. What happened? He asked. Daniel answered softly. Her mother developed serious heart problems. Insurance covered only part of the treatment. Claire withdrew voluntarily, so she could work full-time. There were no academic failures. She left because her family needed her. William looked through the office window at hundreds of employees walking between buildings below. Every person carried a story invisible to everyone else. For years he had believed talent simply rose to the top through hard work. Now he realized that sometimes talent quietly stepped aside because love demanded it. That evening, William asked Daniel to arrange a meeting with the dean of Hudson College, but he gave one very specific instruction. I do not want special treatment for Claire. I want to know whether students like her ever lose their education because life becomes too expensive. 2 days later, he sat across from Dean Eleanor Brooks in a modest conference room overlooking the campus courtyard. Students hurried between lectures carrying backpacks, coffee cups, and oversized textbooks. Their futures seemed wide open, yet the dean's voice carried a quiet sadness. Every semester we lose remarkable students, she explained. Not because they lack ability, because they become caregivers, work multiple jobs, or simply cannot afford to continue. Many never return. William remained silent for several moments. He watched a young nursing student stop to help an elderly groundskeeper gather papers scattered by the wind. The simple act reminded him of Claire. Kindness did not appear only in emergencies. It revealed itself in ordinary moments when no one expected applause. Meanwhile, Claire continued living exactly as she always had. Her mornings began before sunrise. She prepared breakfast for her mother, organized medications into a weekly container, caught the downtown subway, and arrived at Ashford House before the first guests entered the dining room. One rainy afternoon, she noticed a dishwasher quietly studying anatomy flashcards during his lunch break. Preparing for community college? She asked with a smile. The young man nodded shyly. I want to become a physical therapist someday. Claire encouraged him for several minutes, offering study tips she still remembered from nursing school. When the break ended, she returned to work without mentioning that she had once memorized those same chapters while believing they would shape her own future. Her encouragement cost nothing, yet it left the young man smiling for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, William made another reservation at Ashford House, this time without business partners, investors, or assistants. He wanted nothing more than a quiet dinner. When Claire approached his table carrying a menu, genuine surprise crossed her face before settling into her familiar professional smile. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. It is nice to see you looking healthy again." William stood before she could continue. "I never properly thanked you," he said sincerely. Claire gently shook her head. "You already did. Seeing you walk through that door on your own was thanks enough." Her answer caught him completely off guard. Most people measured gratitude by expensive gifts or impressive gestures. Claire measured it by a healthy stranger returning to an ordinary evening. In that quiet moment, William understood something he had spent decades overlooking. The greatest wealth was not found in what people owned. It was found in the lives they quietly lifted without expecting anything in return. William returned to Ashford House several evenings later, but this time he arrived without the invisible shield that usually surrounded powerful people. There was no security detail waiting near the entrance, no assistant carrying a tablet filled with schedules, and no conference call echoing through a wireless headset. He came alone, wearing a simple charcoal jacket instead of a tailored business suit, hoping that for one evening, he could simply be another customer grateful for a second chance. Claire greeted him with the same warm smile she offered every guest who stepped through the restaurant doors. There was no special treatment, no exaggerated excitement, and certainly no expectation that his wealth deserved different manners. She seated him by the window overlooking the softly lit Manhattan streets and handed him a menu before asking the same question she asked everyone else. "Would you like a few more minutes to decide?" William smiled. "Actually, I already know what I would like." Claire waited politely. "I would like to ask you something after your shift, if you are comfortable with that." She studied his expression for a moment before nodding. "If it is only a conversation, I can spare a few minutes." Throughout dinner, William noticed details he had overlooked during his previous visits. Claire quietly carried an extra chair to an elderly woman before she could ask. She helped a young father entertain his restless son with a folded paper napkin shaped like a tiny sailboat. She noticed when a couple celebrating their anniversary looked embarrassed after realizing they had forgotten their reading glasses, then calmly read the evening specials without making them feel uncomfortable. Every small gesture carried the same quiet dignity. None of them were dramatic. Together they revealed exactly who she was. After the restaurant closed and the last guest had gone home, Claire joined William at a small table near the now silent dining room. The chandeliers had been dimmed, leaving only a warm glow across the polished wood floor. For the first time they spoke without the urgency of an emergency or the formality of customer service. William thanked her again, this time not only for helping him that evening, but for reminding him that his health and his life were worth protecting. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she simply smiled and said, "Sometimes people spend so much time building a successful life that they forget to actually live it." The words settled quietly between them. William took a slow breath before reaching into his jacket and placing a neatly folded envelope on the table. "I would like to pay for you to return to nursing school," he said sincerely. "Full tuition, books, living expenses, everything you need." Claire looked at the envelope but made no effort to touch it. After several thoughtful seconds, she gently slid it back toward him. William appeared genuinely confused. "Is the amount not enough?" Claire smiled kindly and shook her head. "This has nothing to do with the amount." He waited quietly. "When I left school, I made that decision because my mother needed me. I have never regretted choosing family." William nodded slowly. "Then let me help you finish what you started." Claire folded her hands together on the table. "If I accept something meant only for me, another student will still leave school next semester for exactly the same reason I did." William remained silent. Claire continued softly. "If you truly want to thank me, do not invest in one waitress. Invest in people who quietly give up their dreams to care for someone they love. Create scholarships for working adults, caregivers, restaurant employees, and people who never stopped dreaming even after life interrupted them. Then every time one of them graduates, that will be thanks enough." William stared at her, speechless. He had expected gratitude. He had expected hesitation. He had even expected pride. He had never expected someone to transform a personal gift into an opportunity for complete strangers. In that quiet restaurant, long after every customer had gone home, the billionaire realized that the woman sitting across from him had once again taught him something no business school, boardroom, or financial success had ever managed to teach. True generosity was never measured by how much you gave to one person. It was measured by how many lives could rise because of a single act of compassion. William did not sleep much that night. Claire's words echoed through every quiet corner of his apartment with surprising clarity. She had refused an opportunity that many people would have accepted without hesitation, not because she lacked ambition, but because she believed gratitude should reach farther than a single life. By sunrise, he had already canceled several meetings and asked Daniel to arrange one new appointment. This time the conference room at Carter Biotech was filled not with investors, but with university administrators, nonprofit leaders, and members of the company's charitable foundation. They expected another discussion about healthcare technology. Instead, William walked to the front of the room carrying nothing but a notebook. "I have spent years investing in innovation," he began quietly. "Today I want us to invest in people whose potential has been interrupted by life." The room fell completely silent. He spoke about caregivers who left school to support aging parents, restaurant workers who studied after midnight, single parents who postponed careers to raise children, and countless ordinary people whose dreams had not disappeared but had simply been delayed. He never mentioned Claire by name. Her story belonged to her. The lesson belonged to everyone. Over the next several weeks, the Carter Foundation worked alongside Hudson College of Nursing and several community colleges across New York to create a new scholarship program unlike any the university had previously offered. It focused on adults returning to education after family responsibilities, financial hardship, or unexpected life circumstances had forced them to leave. Tuition assistance would be paired with flexible scheduling, textbook support, transportation assistance, and mentoring from professionals who had once faced similar obstacles. When the proposal reached the university board, the dean quietly smiled. "This may change more lives than any single donation we have ever received," she said. Meanwhile, Claire continued living almost exactly as before. She still caught the early subway every morning. She still carried groceries upstairs for her mother every Wednesday evening. She still remembered the favorite desserts of regular customers and encouraged Emily, the younger server, to keep believing in her own future. If anyone noticed that life around Claire was slowly beginning to change, it was because opportunities seemed to appear wherever kindness had quietly been planted months or even years earlier. The dishwasher she had encouraged passed his entrance exams for physical therapy school. The elderly veteran she often served recommended Ashford House to his entire neighborhood because, in his words, "There is a young woman there who treats every person with respect." Even the restaurant manager found himself creating more flexible schedules for employees attending evening classes after remembering the example Claire set every single day. Kindness, it seemed, had become quietly contagious. Nearly 2 months after the emergency, Claire received an unexpected letter bearing the seal of Hudson College of Nursing. She assumed it was another fundraising request and almost placed it aside until her mother encouraged her to open it. Inside was an invitation to meet with the dean regarding a newly established scholarship program for returning nursing students. Claire read the letter twice before looking at her mother in disbelief. Margaret smiled through grateful eyes. "Maybe life is giving your dream back," she whispered. Claire attended the meeting with no expectations. Dean Brooks welcomed her warmly and explained the scholarship in careful detail. It had been designed specifically for people whose education had been interrupted by caregiving responsibilities and financial hardship. "Your previous academic record remains outstanding," the dean said. "If you still wish to become a nurse, your place here is waiting." Claire sat quietly, unable to speak for several moments. Finally, she asked the one question resting in her heart. "Who made this possible?" The dean smiled gently. "Someone who believed that compassion should create opportunities, not obligations." Claire understood immediately. She lowered her eyes for a brief moment, not because she felt indebted, but because she realized William had listened more carefully than she had ever imagined. He had honored not only her request, but also the values behind it. Weeks later, as autumn leaves drifted through the streets of Manhattan, William walked past Ashford House once again. Through the window, he saw Claire laughing softly with her co-workers before the dinner rush began. This time he did not go inside. He simply smiled and continued walking, knowing that the greatest thank you had never been spoken across a restaurant table. It had been written instead into the futures of people who would finally receive another chance to finish the dreams they had been forced to set aside. Nearly 2 years passed, and Manhattan continued moving with its familiar rhythm of crowded sidewalks, glowing office towers, and dreams carried through subway stations before sunrise. Seasons changed. Restaurants welcomed new guests. Companies celebrated new milestones. Yet some changes happened so quietly that only time could reveal their true significance. On a bright spring morning, the auditorium at Hudson College of Nursing filled with proud families, professors, and graduates wearing navy blue gowns and white honor cords. Cameras flashed as names were called one after another. In the third row sat Margaret Bennett, her health stronger than it had been in years, holding a neatly folded handkerchief while trying unsuccessfully to hide tears of happiness. Beside her sat Emily, now studying healthcare administration while working part-time, the former dishwasher who had become a physical therapy student, and several familiar faces from Ashford House who had rearranged work schedules simply to cheer for someone they considered family. None of them noticed the quiet man taking a seat near the back of the auditorium. William Carter had arrived alone, without media attention or corporate announcements. He had declined the reserved front row offered by the university and instead chose a seat where he could simply watch the ceremony unfold like every other guest. When Claire Bennett's name echoed across the auditorium, the applause began politely before growing louder as classmates who knew her story rose to their feet. Claire walked confidently across the stage wearing the white uniform that had once existed only in her imagination. She accepted her nursing diploma with both hands before briefly looking toward the audience. Her eyes found her mother first. Then, almost unexpectedly, they found William standing quietly in the back of the room, applauding with genuine pride. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Some moments were complete without words. After the ceremony ended, families gathered beneath flowering trees outside the campus building while graduates embraced loved ones and posed for photographs. Claire eventually noticed William waiting patiently near a stone fountain, careful not to interrupt the celebrations. She walked over wearing her graduation cap beneath the warm afternoon sun. "I had a feeling you might come," she said with a gentle smile. William returned the smile. "I would not have missed this day." Claire looked down at the diploma she held against her heart. "Neither would I." For a moment, they simply stood listening to children laughing nearby and birds singing from the old maple trees surrounding the campus. Finally, William spoke. The scholarship program welcomed its 100th returning student this semester. Claire's eyes widened with quiet surprise. 100. He nodded. Teachers, caregivers, restaurant workers, single parents, veterans, people who believed life had closed one door forever. He paused before continuing softly. Many of them wrote letters saying they had stopped dreaming until someone reminded them it was not too late. Claire closed her eyes briefly, overcome not by pride, but by gratitude that something so much larger than either of them had taken root. "That is the real success," she whispered. William smiled. "You were right. Helping one person changes one life. Helping many people changes a generation." Margaret slowly approached them with careful steps before wrapping her daughter in a warm embrace. She looked toward William with kind eyes. "Thank you for listening to her instead of simply helping her." William gently shook his head. "She was the one who taught me how." Several months later, Claire began her first position as a registered nurse at a community hospital where every patient received the same quiet respect she had once shown every guest carrying a dinner menu. William, meanwhile, kept one framed photograph on a bookshelf inside his office. It was not a picture of a groundbreaking medical device or a company celebrating record profits. It was a simple photograph taken outside Hudson College of Nursing. A former waitress stood beside her smiling mother while holding a diploma beneath a clear blue sky. Whenever visitors asked why that picture occupied such an important place in his office, William always answered the same way. "Because that is the day I finally understood that success is not measured by how high we climb. It is measured by how many people we help rise with us." And somewhere in the endless movement of New York City, strangers continued changing one another's lives through quiet acts of kindness that rarely made headlines, but always left the world a little better than they found it.